When you think of breaking news, who's the first person that comes to your mind? Well, more than likely you're going to say Adrian Wojnarowski, who is an insider for ESPN, who seems to have connections to just about every single person in the NBA. What if I told you this smiling middle-aged man is actually a lot more dangerous than you might think? Surely the biggest insider in the NBA who holds a lot of knowledge that most people would dream to have cannot be that dangerous, right? Well, if you've seen even a video on this channel, you know that this man is not as innocent as you might think. This is a part of a continuation of a series called The Dark Side of NBA Media, where I'll be talking about certain aspects of the media that no one wants to talk about. In this episode, I'm going to talk about Adrian Wojnarowski, who is one of the most evil people in the NBA. There's a playlist in the description to see every episode that I've uploaded so far. Now, before we even get into everything that Woj has done over these past couple years, I think we need to look into how he even has these connections. Well, there's two aspects we need to look at that are very important. Number one is the fact that back in the day, he would contact the Spurs and essentially he was able to get himself into the Spurs inner circle. And if you guys know anything about the Spurs and what a lot of people call the Popovich tree, you know that they have so many connections throughout the NBA. In fact, 30% of the NBA head coaches have ties to Greg Popovich. And a lot of these guys are some of the best coaches in the NBA. Now, the other aspect we have to look at, and I think is probably the most important one, is the CAA. For those of you that don't know what the CAA is, basically it's an agency that works with a bunch of athletes, and Woj is actually signed to the CAA. In fact, the list of players that the CAA has signed is the most insane list I think I've ever seen. It's an all-star talent roster. So because Woj is signed to that agency, he not only has ties to those players so he can talk to them because their agents are correlated, but he can even get access to most of the teams in the NBA, which makes total sense because that's how Woj bombs happen. He has the news before just about every single person. However, when you don't want to work with them, things don't exactly go well. And a perfect example of this is how he treated LeBron James. Now, I don't know how many of you guys really thought about this, but how many times have you seen Woj report on something from him, like him saying it, that was from the Lakers? Well, the answer would be not at all, because he doesn't have ties to the Lakers. Why doesn't he have ties to the Lakers? Because he doesn't have ties with LeBron James. Now, Woj, back in the day when LeBron was starting to grow a reputation as a player, he really did try to get in contact with LeBron and be his go-to guy. However, there was another person by the name of Brian Windhorst who's been covering him ever since Cleveland, so that's why they went to Windhorst instead. And because of this, Woj would put a bad light on LeBron whenever he could, and he continues to do that to this day. Do you see what I'm trying to get at? If you don't want to work with Woj, he's either going to A, bash you and try to make you have a bad reputation, or B, he's not even going to report on you. But Spex, it's Woj we're talking about. He announces just about every single big news story, right? Well, remember that James Harden trade where he got traded to Philly? Well, Woj was constantly saying throughout the day that Philadelphia and James Harden were not going to make a trade. In fact, James Harden getting traded was not likely. However, that's not what our boy Brian Windhorst said. In fact, he was the one who was saying that Philly and Harden were in talks.
Now, there's been no, I'm told, real negotiation that's gone on, but listen, I think Philadelphia's they are very motivated to acquire James Harden.
Meanwhile.
Yeah, so the teams are absolutely engaged in trade discussions. I know that there's people saying things on the record, trying to act like that's not happening, but it is absolutely happening.
Who do you believe in this situation? Woj, who has a very big credible past, or Brian Windhorst, who still has a credible past, but not as much as Woj? Well, when James Harden was officially traded to Philadelphia, Adrian Wojnarowski made up an excuse saying that like he was traded at the last minute or some bullshit like that.
At the very end of the negotiations today, and they really started in earnest this morning. You know, Philadelphia had lobbed calls a couple times this week, really with no response from the Nets. They weren't countering. They just accepted the offers.
Shut up, bitch. Oh my God.
Even though the trade talks were going on for a majority of the time. So if there's a piece of news that wasn't reported by Woj first, then it really doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant unless it actually becomes official. Then when it does become official, it's justified by Woj that, oh, the news was last minute and some dumb stuff like that. In fact, this isn't the first time that Woj just completely ignored news because he wasn't the first to it. There are multiple examples of him doing this, even in the Kevin Durant trade situation when there was that whole ultimatum that was brought up. But you know what? I don't want to talk about. I want to talk about the fact that he buried a story regarding the Celtics head coach. Ime Udoka, for those of you who don't know, is currently not coaching for the Celtics because there was a cheating scandal, and it could be actually SA. We don't really know. But what I can tell you is that Woj is hiding certain details from the public. In fact, ESPN as a whole is not talking about it. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about them announcing the suspension. I literally did a Malika Andrews video where that got brought up. I'm talking about additional details that ESPN just didn't talk about at all and Woj did not cover. So why did the NBA's biggest insider not cover this story? Remember that CAA connection I told you about earlier? Well, Ime Udoka has the same agent as Woj. And it's at this point where I start to take away credibility from guys like Woj, who are constantly hiding stories because he doesn't want to piss off his sources. And I get it, you need these sources to operate, but you have multiple connections around the NBA. And if you were such a true insider, wouldn't you try to report on them instead of just hiding them and burying stories like you have in the past? I mean, we could talk about the entire Kevin Durant trade situation where Woj was constantly protecting Sean Marks. Honestly, it got to a point where I didn't believe anything I saw from ESPN. I needed to hear it straight up from someone in Kevin Durant's camp. So you might be saying, okay, so all he does is cover stories, he bashes players, he tries to control narratives, and for being the #1 insider in the NBA to most, he's not exactly honest about a lot of things that he says. He can't be dangerous, right? And obviously, no, I'm not saying he's gonna pull a Draymond Green and knock someone out. However, what he does have is just about every single connection in the NBA that one could desire. That much info has so much power you guys don't even know. Also, let's not forget that not only is he just an insider, he goes on shows like ESPN NBA Today and talks about these things. If you look at it from another perspective, he's kind of like an analyst in a way as well. And you guys know, I don't like every single ESPN analyst because a lot of them have a shady past, including a couple that I've already talked about. So not only does he have the amount of information that he has, but he can also spew garbage to people to push a narrative. So once again, like I said, he can control narratives, which is a scary thing. A man like Woj should not have this amount of power like the way he does. So what can we do about it? With Malika Andrews, we could fire her. With Rachel Nichols, you could essentially just remove her from the whole ESPN space as a whole. And even some of these other analysts I'm really not too fond of. If ESPN wanted to, they could just remove them. But a guy like Woj, you don't really have that much leverage on. There's not much you can really do because there's a good chance that he has a lot of dirt on some of your favorite owners and coaches and players. So if worse came to worse, don't be surprised if Woj just spills everything that he knows. But I don't think ESPN is going to do that because they know how much power that Woj has. And in business, especially a multi-billion-dollar business like the NBA, having power is one of the scariest things, especially when you have too much of it.